What's up, everybody? Akash Inti, your favorite biotech research analyst here today. We are talking about preclinical drug design. Let's talk about why is it important, what does it mean, and how do biotech and pharmaceutical manufacturers use this. With that, why is drug design important, preclinical drug design important? Well, as we talked about in the past, drugs are at a very high level, very, very important for the healthcare industry in the sense that they save absolutely tons of money. For every dollar that you spend in biopharmaceutical R&D, the ROI is like through the roof because it ends up cutting down on, biopharmaceuticals end up cutting down on hospital costs. They end up cutting down on physician costs and so on and so forth. So every dollar typically that there's been studies, dollars that you spend on biopharmaceuticals end up a lot more efficient in terms of a healthcare spend. So that's kind of the why. At a high level, again, that gets down to you design drugs, it's a better return on investment in terms of healthcare. Okay, cool. Now that we got past that, what is preclinical drug design? What does that even mean? We've briefly glimpsed some of these ideas in the past, the idea of clinical drug development. We've talked about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, even some phase 4 studies, the IND, the NDA, all of this, I believe, in a past video, so I refer you guys to that. Preclinical simply means everything that's before human. So before you take a drug and you take it through the FDA's clinical trial process, FDA being the regulator, Food and Drug Administration, U.S. Food and Drug Administration, we need to make sure that we have all of the required paperwork that says and proves to the FDA that it actually makes sense what we're doing. We're not just taking some random thing and saying, let's go put this in humans. I mean, we kind of are, but no, but it's the idea being that there is some science and there's some logic that's been put into this, and there's no intention to kill someone. Rather, the intention is that we are thinking through how this might potentially treat or cure someone. Cool. So that's kind of what drug design is. It's coming up with, there's 3 pieces to it. So there's lead identification. That's piece number 1. Piece number 2, lead optimization. And piece number 3 is kind of lead optimization, and you'll get a better sense as to why in a bit. So with that, number 1, what is lead identification? So let's say we are developing a drug, and I don't know, I'll come up with a COX-2 inhibitor. COX-2, from what I remember off the top of my head, I believe it's a what are these things called? Anti-inflammatory. So it ends up lowering an inflammatory response within the body, or it's simply, I think a better way of understanding it is that it shuts down the inflammatory response, a particular type of inflammatory response within the body. These are, I think, like Tylenol or Advil. One of these is like that, if I remember correctly, but don't quote me on that. But that's the idea. It's an anti-inflammatory. Okay, cool. Let's say we're developing a new COX-2, and let's say it's a COX-2 inhibitor, so that's the drug class. We would need to know what is the structure of COX-2, the crystal structure. In other words, what does that receptor look like? So COX-2 is a receptor, and we've talked about receptors in the past, so let's think of it a lock and key, going back to that concept, lock and key. So the receptor means it's the lock. There's a key, a ligand, which will be this hand, and it'll bind to the lock. And I won't be able to do this because I've only got 2 hands. I have to grow a 3rd one soon. But the idea being that the lock and key meet, and they have a very specific conformation, or in other words, they interact with each other in a spatial sense, in a specific spatial sequence that ends up catalyzing a reaction to that receptor, and it sends a signal into the cell. Mind-blowing. It's actually really, really cool. It's fascinating to me. It's like, well, you just put these things in this particular order, and bam, a signal is sent. So crazy. Anyways, with that, with this concept, you need to develop a drug that would appropriately fit that receptor, whether it's an agonist or an antagonist. And these are concepts that we'll come back to in the future, but agonist, as I talked about, is something that helps to amplify that signal, and antagonist is something that would block that signal. Cool. So you need to understand, what is that receptor like? In other words, like if you think about it in terms of the lock, what is that lock like? And I'm no key maker, but or I'm no locksmith, but understanding like the sequence, what is that sequence like, is a high level kind of what's going on. Cool. So that's the first thing, is to identify that piece, and then, so in this COX-2 example, and then think through, okay, well, what are the big important structural pieces to, what are the functional groups that will enact a function on the receptor? And when we think about, and we'll have to talk, we'll have to go back to some of these concepts in the future, because I'm really just zooming through things right now with you guys, but I'm making a couple assumptions. I don't know where you guys are at in terms of your understanding, so if there's any questions, highly encourage you to write them down. But you need to understand, what are the different functional groups on that molecule. That functional groups meaning parts of the small molecule, the antibody, that have a particular function on the receptor. And so with this, you'll design a drug, and it will be your kind of your version 1, your lead. This is often what is called a lead compound, where it's like the 1.0 version of, okay, this is what works. And obviously it's not working perfectly, but it works well enough that it showed some type of results, like a therapeutic. It showed a safety and efficacy signal in vivo or in vitro. In other words, in glass or in like a cell line or something like that, where it's like, okay, cool, we might want to take this into the future. In the future, what companies often do was then a process called lead optimization. In other words, they'll be like, okay, well, we know this works, but what's the best way that it could work? And so they go about processes of adding on side chains and different types of functional groups to the molecule itself, so that it is optimized for that particular receptor. Really, really cool concept, but this often takes lots of time. Then I said number 3 was lead optimization. And again, the same idea is that, like, okay, well, we figured out this piece, but you can always innovate, or you can always improve upon your idea. So that's the idea of lead optimization. From there, at some point, the company will be like, we are going to take this into the clinic, sign us up, we're ready to put down a few $1 million. But yeah, this is kind of what happens. So that lead optimization kind of continues ongoing over time. But at a high level, this is preclinical drug design. Again, this can take years. So it'll often start in academia, and then the drug may transition into industry. It may be funded by some type of government grants to go about and continue innovating. But at some point, it will end up turning over to industry hands, likely, to really be designed and developed into a clinical drug. I know we covered through a lot. I think there was one more piece, the last, number 3. So we talked about, just to reiterate, we talked about why is this an important concept. We talked about what is drug design, and then how does it apply? Yeah, we talked about that as well. So if you guys liked this video, like, comment, subscribe, share. And yeah, that's all of the adjectives, or I guess verbs. These are verbs. Of what I would love for you guys to do. Let me know if you guys have any questions, or you want me to cover any topics, particularly in biotech and pharmaceutical land. With that, keep up, thrive, stay sexy. I'll see you guys.